Hello everybody, this is a very quick demo. I guess I would call it my first draft demo of the data ingestion engine that I built. I built it with C#, a tool called Biml, and what I do with it is I generate a data ingestion package or a group of packages for data points, and I also use it to automate the creation of the DataVault 2.0 pattern that was created by Dan Lindstedt, and he has a great book about it. And I'll go into those in another video, but the whole main idea is you have a source database table or CSV, whatever that is, but it's basically representing an entity with a lot of rows, different data types, different structures, and usually the entity has a key identifier, unique identifier for it, whether it's a natural or a generated key. And in this case I'm using the AdventureWorks employee table, and I'm just going to use one to highlight the whole main idea. But the idea is I've got the employee table, I've got the business entity ID, and I've got some other columns. If you look at it, you'll see that this is an employee table. It's got some numbers, some text, some columns that have job title, marital status. Now, an employee with an OLTP system is going to get married, or some of them are single, some of them are going to have different hiring dates. Things change, different login IDs, so as the OLTP system is functioning, this data over time will change. One of the things that DataVault helps us do is, in a very agile manner, we're able to keep track of this table or this source information, and from that source we then are able to keep track of history. So what we do with the DataVault, I'm going to talk about two of its components. It actually has three, but the two main ones are the hub and the satellite table. So for now, the hub table, very simply, is basically a database table that consists of the primary key and its hash, where you got it from, when you loaded it, and when you first saw it in the database in your systems. What this does is it keeps track of all the primary keys, of all the business keys, and these business key identifiers are stored in one place, and you always know where you first saw that business key, and you have to keep track of it because this represents a very important business function. So that's your business key for your employee. Now, your employee has many satellites, or could have many satellites. In this case we're talking about one of them, which is the satellite represented by the employee table, and basically this is where we keep track of all the changes that happen to that table. Now, source tables in the DataVault, I will not get into the deep details of them, but what I will show you here is a satellite table basically keeps track of your source system. It keeps track of all the history, it keeps track of all the changes. Every time it hits the source system, it takes a snapshot of that source system, compares it to what you already have in the satellite using the hash keys, which we'll go into more details later, but basically using this hash diff, which is a hash of all the rows in the table. It does your change detection, and then it inserts a new row if there's a new insert in the table, or it inserts a new row if there's an update, so you keep track of all the history of a certain record. That being said, in order to get the data from your source system to the DataVault hubs and satellites, and then later links, all you need to do is build an ETL package. Now imagine if you've got 250 tables, imagine if you've got multiple databases as your source system. It basically becomes a very long implementation with a lot of work that you need to do. You can make a lot of mistakes and you have to do a lot of testing. Basically you find yourself building something very repetitive. as a programmer, when I was building a data vault with a very smart consultant, I found myself doing things very repetitively. So I thought, as a programmer usually would, how do I automate this process? Whether you're loading the data in Python, whether you're loading it in SQL, whether you're loading it in any type of data ingestion framework, you'll notice that the steps are very similar. The only differences are some things change or some functions change depending on the nature of the source system data. Now, when I say source system data, that mainly means the metadata. You need to read what the source system is about, what is the primary key, what is the unique identifier, the business keys, what are the data types, and then you either do an ETL, so extract, transform, and load, or an ELT, extract, load, and transform, but the process is the same for different data points. So, I found myself building a list of SSIS packages because we were using the Microsoft platform, and every single SSIS package represented one table, and it would be used to load that table. So here it's load employee. If you had 250 packages, you'd have a master package loading 250 tables. I'm using one table as an example. Basically, you would have a stage table, you put the changes in there, you count what you've already got in the data vault, and then if it's new, you start loading everything from scratch. If not, then you load the data, do change detection through some logic using the hash keys. And pretty much every package looks the same except for the metadata, which are what are the columns looking like inside. So you look here. If this was the customers, not the employees table, you'd have a different list of columns. And of course, there's some transformations that happen that transform columns, say from varchar to nvarchar, for Unicode encoding and things like that, date times and date time 2, and ints and strings and all those lovely things. So if I was about to do that for 250 tables, it'd probably be easily a 6 month to 1 year project. Now, what really grabbed my attention about the data vault is it was a methodology and a technique and a framework where you could do things in an agile manner. And Dan Lansdata and Scott Ambler had a very nice talk. Basically, it's a 1 hour talk that talks about building a data vault and a data warehouse in an agile manner, and that really grabbed my attention because that hadn't been my experience before. So this amazing technique, I thought, how do I basically do that? Because I've started to recognize the patterns. You've got a hub, satellite, and then there's another component called a link, but in this case, for simplicity, I'm just talking about hubs and sats. How do I do this? I found a very handy tool called BIML. Now, this tool is basically a XML and scripting engine, and you can use it for free. There's a free component called BIML Express, and there's of course a paid component. It's by a company called Verigence, and what this does is it basically creates for you an XML, readable XML and scriptable, that allows you to basically describe your database, describe your source systems, harvest the metadata, and using C# scripts or VB if you prefer, you can build database tables, ETL, SSIS scripts, SQL, stored procedures, or SQL views, or SQL, anything in SQL, tables, DDLs, and you can also create your SSIS packages. So that was great. I learned how to use BIML, and using BIML, I was able to use this as a technique, as a way of basically automating my work. So instead of building the data vault and the data mart in a year or 6 months, we ended up building one in a month. So the automation basically took care of the part that took a long time to build, and at the same time it gave us much more time for the exciting part of any project, which is the actual analytics that would give the user and the stakeholders a lot of business value. Now, I will go through this very precisely at a later time, but this is me just showing you these are my DDL scripts that got generated. And these DDL scripts, just by reading the source system, I was able to create the hub and the satellite table. And there are examples on the bimlscript.com where they do lots of nifty things with metadata. They create all sorts of SQL statements. They can even create links and stage tables. So I create a stage table, a sat, and a hub. And then I generated, believe it or not, this load employee master package is fully generated using Biml, and it runs, and based on that I can then load my data vault. Now when I loaded my data vault, what I found was I've loaded the data vault, I've got all the data. I can now use Power BI or Tableau or any reporting engine to build reports and to do self-service reporting. From the data vault we build the star schema, and from there you use your reporting engine. But one thing was missing that a lot of people were asking for inside the enterprise, which was, what about the other OLTP systems that want to read data from the data mart? What about the systems that want to read from an API? And I thought, okay, API, well then we'll have to create some type of web API, or maybe a Spring Boot web API or something with Python, and then that would expose the data in the data vault, and then other applications be able to talk to it. And up until then it was just a nice idea that it would be done in the future. Then one day I was watching an MSDN channel, and this very cool guy called Hassan Habib was actually showing off the OData API, and I thought, OData? I've heard about that. And it's basically an open source API framework built by Microsoft that enables you, using ASP.NET Core, to basically build an API that exposes your data. So just to show off what I could do very quickly using the generator and the OData API, here is an API that I generated, and I'll show you that too, so in case you don't believe me. It's basically a context that's got the hubs and the sats. It's basically a service, and then I right click on it. Using the power tools, I generated a context and a model based by reverse engineering the data vault that I had, and then using that I came up with the objects that I'm going to use. Here's my sat employee, and then based on that I've got a employee controller with get and just enable query. And the cool part about that demo was, in 4 lines of code you're able to expose your data vault to an API. And just to prove that, here is my OData API, and this is employees. Let me go in and show you something. So it generates an API, and just like you're writing a normal select statement, you can select 1 field, 2 fields, as many fields as you like. And when you read about the OData standard, you will find filters, you will find ability to get count, top, and even relationships, where underneath the surface there's an API that basically uses that to read data for you. In this example, this shows 1 employee in the data vault, and you notice the hash diff. So this is John 0. See, here he was married. Notice the hash, if that's the hash of all the columns in the table. And then here he was single. Notice it's a different hash. And that's how we did change detection. And I ran the scripts, the SSIS packages twice. Once to detect once on the initial state, which when he was single. Then the second time I changed his marital status to married, and then ran it again, and there was the change detection. The DataVault was able to take a snapshot of both cases after it did change detection. And that's my demo for now. Thank you.